Hey everyone, thank you for coming. My name is Alper. I'm the Education Content Manager for this year's CodeDay Labs. I'm happy to welcome André Cardoso, and he will be talking to you guys about game feel and game development today. So André, if you'd like to introduce yourself a little more today, that'd be great.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for the introduction, and also just thanks for inviting me. I think I'm super happy to be talking here about a little bit about game development and also just game feel, which I think like is a super important topic. I don't think it's talked about enough, and it's for me one of the most important parts about game development and understanding the magic behind games in general. So I'm gonna start sharing my screen if that's okay. Let me share my screen. All right. And so the other thing I want to mention is that we can do Q&A, I think, whenever. So since this will have a part that I'm just going to open Unity live, I think it's fine that we can ask questions in the middle. I'm totally fine. Like, I don't mind it being very specific as a normal presentation. But anyways, so I think everyone's seen the screen, a little blue screen. So as I said, actually I should open like a chat or Q&A to make sure that everything's fine.
André, if you want, I'll let you know whenever we have a question,
Perfect.
so you don't have to worry about that.
Perfect. Thank you. Is my
No worries.
screen sharing also like the
Yeah, it
blue
looks
one?
great. Yeah.
Awesome. Perfect. All right. So as I was saying, today I'm going to talk about GameFuel. I guess to start, I want to first properly introduce myself. So I'm Andre. I'm a developer and designer, game developer and designer from Brazil. Nowadays, I live in Copenhagen in Denmark because I work at Unity. And besides working at Unity, I also have a YouTube channel where I recreate mechanics from other games as my personal way to practice game development, because I basically dissect mechanics from other games as a way to learn, but also to share with the community, cool stuff of uh, code resource and just cool stuff, in general. It's pretty fun. I have a lot of fun in mix and jam. I also do the same work at Unity, so I focus a lot on dissecting stuff, but the main focus being to teach people how to use Unity and how to use the new features and whatnot. But yeah, so let's start talking about one thing that is very important for everyone to know, that is a big reference for this talk or for this workshop. You can call it whatever you want. Is a book by Steve Swink called Game Fuel. This book is super great, and I recommend everyone reading it because before approaching this topic, I always saw it as something more of a visual enhancement for games or when you're developing things. And I think that this book goes really deep into a lot of things other than visual, right? So it goes a little bit into psychology. It goes a little bit into biology, like how our human uh, actual physiology, like how we physically work, which is really interesting. And so this book is really, really cool. And a lot of the talk is going to be based on this book, which is really good and I recommend. And we're going to take a look a little bit of how we start like thinking about game feel and how would we apply things at Unity specifically, but also, of course, you could use any game engine for that. Yeah, so what is game feel? So a great description and definition of game feel that is actually in the book. It says that game feel is a tactile, kinesthetic sense of manipulating a virtual object, the sensation of control in a game. So game feel is literally, like the description is saying, is something that really makes you feel that you're inside of the game, that you are in control. It creates a flow that is almost seamless, so that basically the game becomes better to play. It has a better feel. And it's super interesting to talk about this topic, I think, because it's such an invisible art. If you think about it, is um, sometimes you just want to say, oh my God, this game feels so good. But can you explain why, how? And that's what we're trying to figure out here, even though it still is a bit of an invisible sort of magic, but that's what we're going to try to figure out here. I want to bring another quote from the book. It's a bit long, but I think is really good to just read we can read it together. It's really cool. So instead of looking around and seeing a TV, couch, and their hands on a controller, players look through the scene to the screen into the game world. When players sit and stare, they're not catatonic. Rather, they've substituted their visual sense for one in the game world, extending it outward to a new place. So, as I was saying, the idea that you are so immersed into an experience, into a game, that you replace the reality that you're in, which is real life, and then you're playing this virtual world, but it's more seamless. So, let's continue with the code here. They're looking around, keenly aware of their surroundings in the game. This is because an avatar in a video game is a kind of tool. It provides both a potential for action and channel for perception. So the idea being here that when something is an extension of you, right, an extension of what you're doing, an extension of your actions, it feels seamless. And a simple comparison I can make is when you drive a car, right? At the start, it's really jarring because you're not aware of it and you don't feel as if your actions you're not used to the fact of that interaction going back and forth between you driving your car and how the car is reacting. But the more you learn about the car and the more you are immersed into that world, it almost feels like the car is an extension of you. It's like almost like Transformers. Like, you are a human being, but as soon as you enter a car, you're like, you are a car in many ways. For people that drive, you know how it feels like to drive, and sometimes you can actually tell where are the boundaries of the car. You can actually feel like you know the limits of the car. So that's the main thing. But there are three things that are very important that basically make game feel like something that allows for this immersion, right? So these three things I'm going to describe with this little drawing, an amazing drawing I made for this presentation. So first thing is real-time control. So let's take a look at a simplified, what is real-time control? So real-time control would just be the act of you press a button, right? You have an input, and then something happens in the screen. And of course, that thing that happens in the screen just goes back to you. That's the main loop of real-time control. You act, then you see whatever the game screen is doing, and then you're going to react based on what happened. But this is the simplified process, right? Like, in order to understand why this is so important, like why real-time control is such a crucial part of game feel, we have to, take a little bit of a deeper look into what is this process. So here's the thing. When the player is looking at the screen, they need to understand what's going on. So they go through the first process, which is the reaction process. So they're reacting to what they see to the screen. So they have a stimulus, then they have a thought of what they want to do, and then they make a decision. They go like, okay, maybe there's a box in front of me, so I want to jump, right? And as soon as they take this decision, they make an input, and this input is, literally like the little input going through the cable until the game console, into the PC. And so this input is usually it's made out of buttons, joysticks, and some sort of movement, other states that you can press in this controller. So whatever you have as inputs, you send it to the console. Then what the console is going to do, the console is going to process this information, doing calculations, based on performance and based on basically update cycles of, okay, this is how I react to inputs on a frames per second fashion and all that. And the last thing, of course, is the output. And that output, usually is composed of video, audio, and sometimes even motor reactions. Like sometimes your controller shake, sometimes lights blink. So there's many types of output, but these are just an example. So this constitute the main loop of what's going on. Now, why is this important at all? So here's the thing that is really crucial for why real-time control is such a big part of game feel. In the first step, so this first arrow, here's how to understand what happens in our brain, which in the book, the Game Feel book, mentions is really important. So the humans take usually around 100 milliseconds for the perception part of it. So you're looking at the screen, and our brain takes 100 milliseconds just to sort of like make sense of what's happening, right? And then it takes 70 milliseconds to process that information, to then have a motor reaction, which also takes around 70 milliseconds, which means that whatever the other steps are, right? So to the input, for the processing, and for the output, those should be around 240 milliseconds for it to feel natural. Because if it doesn't, if things don't react in that little short time, our brain goes through another loop iteration. Now, what do I mean by this? So think about this. Let's say your game processes everything on the other loop in 480 milliseconds. So what this would mean is that you would go through 2 loops of this cycle. So then your brain is going to have a motor reaction at the end, but nothing's going to happen on the process stage. So the perception, you're going to take another loop and iteration of noticing what's happening, and then, coming to the conclusion that nothing happened. And then you're probably going to have another motor reaction. But then the first motor reaction is going to happen in the game, and it's going to create this really weird, like, oh no, this game has input delay. This game has some sort of bug. And this is why 60 games that are 60 frames per second and they're smooth feel better to play than other games, because this loop is just faster. And so your brain doesn't have to go through multiple iteration loops to understand, all right, what's going on. So anyways, a great quote from the book says that this is continuous feedback loop when you have processes at 240 milliseconds. The game provides a continuous, unbroken flow of input and instant response, enabling ongoing correction cycles. Now, what is correction cycles? It means that if you make a wrong move in the game, if you're moving your character that is Mario, if the process stage is fast enough, it allows you to constantly correct it without having to waste cycles of cognition to understand what's going on if there's no visible reaction from the game. I know this is very technical, but we're going to go to the fun part anyways. So here's a good example of Mario again. So the first original appearance of Mario was in the game Donkey Kong. And so the thing with Donkey Kong is that the jump of Mario is linear. So you have a speed. Once you jump, it's going to complete a very specific and linear curve. So it's just going to go like, all right, up and down. The cool thing about Super Mario is that Super Mario introduced gravity and also input variation. So meaning that the amount of seconds that you pressed and held the button A, for example, mattered for your, for your descent or your jump in general, right? And so what this means is that the Super Mario movement and gameplay has a better feel to it, because the gravity and what are you doing and what is your brain reacting to, how long you should be pressing or releasing the button, it means that you can't, like, you immediately see the changes in the air, in this case specifically for Mario, when Mario jumps, right? You're in the air, then you can release, it's going to fall faster, or you're going to hold and it's going to keep doing it. And your brain's going to go through that cycle of, okay, processing what's going on. And it just feels better because Mario reacts more to what you're doing, right? So it's coming back from the TV and you're seeing the changes that you're doing real time with no delay, right? As with the Donkey Kong game, you just press and sort of just wait until the jump to fall to use that next cycle to, okay, now I need to figure out what I have to do, right? But yeah, those are 2 examples. And of course, this is the classic Donkey Kong. And as you can see, when you jump, you just go on a linear sort of curve. But it's a fun game. Don't get me wrong. Super fun game. But it's totally different that from what was introduced in the 64 era, for example, that gives you so much control over Mario. There's so much physics, there's so much gravity, there's so much going on, but it's so fluid, and Mario reacts to every little thing you do in your controller. And this would go to be improved for every iteration of video games, because now we have more processing power. And like, graphics and all isn't always that important or the best performance, but it does mean that it allows us to create experiences that allows to make our players to feel more in control, therefore making the games feel good. Now, this is all real-time control. What is the second element that is really important? The second really very important element is simulated space, because it doesn't matter if you have an amazing jump mechanic and you have this cool gameplay and it's really solid and really fast reacting to whatever you're doing, if there's nothing around it to make it have sense. You need to have perception of the environment in order for your mechanic to feel good, because otherwise, if you're just jumping in a blank space, your real-time control won't feel good because you don't have something to utilize it in, right? You need to have a simulated space for it to make sense. Now, of course, if you have a space, then it starts making sense. And especially if, for example, your real-time controls collide with the world, it generates a feeling of a realistic universe that, in this case, not only will it allow for faster cycle loops of cognition, but it will always allow for more realism. So you feel like the world is more real. Then you have these collisions in the world that if the player hits, you stop, just like in the real world, which makes sense, would make you more immersed to the experience. For example, for the second block of little tall grass, if you just go over it, then you would break the perception. It wouldn't feel so good because, again, what we're doing as game designers, we're trying to create a reality, and this is not what our brain expects. Our brain expects to see collision in this case, and so the simulated space sense, creates this opportunity for us to, as game designers, to create worlds in which we can basically make all of this real world input to make sense. And for example, in icy level, your real-time controls may become a little bit more sloppy just because of the environment. So the environment is also giving and introducing more sense and more realism and more immersion to this world, right? And so a little bit of a word, active perception. This is what simulated spaces allow you to have active perception of what you're controlling. Because as soon as you start moving your character, if the world is sort of moving or reacting to you, then it makes sense. Otherwise, it wouldn't make a lot of sense. And the third big step, which is what a lot of people tend to focus in, the third element of what would be game feel, is polish. So this is an example of a project I made in Mix and Jam, where I was recreating the free flow combat mechanic from the Batman games. And as you can see here, the hit is just the animation, and you can see that the character is going to hit. That's it. The other character just activates an animation. Now, if you go back into the ideology of the cycle, what happens is your brain might take another cycle to realize that you actually hit the player. The animation feedback is pretty good, sure, but it could be better, because polish is not only adding fancy elements to your screen. Polish and effects are an actual practical way of solving a problem, which in this case is making sure that it's very clear that we're hitting the player, making sure that the player understands that they can move on to the next enemy or they can try their next hit. And so we need to give clear feedback. And in game development, we can do this in many ways. And for this project in particular, I added particles with lights and also screen shake. So all of this makes it feel much better, and the feedback is better. So in terms of the real-time control, your brain will take less cycles to understand what's going on. And third is a really polished experience because it's giving you quite super clear feedback. Same goes for this Splatoon video, which is also the Mix and Jam video. So you can see here that this is the shooting mechanic before any changes. So, I mean, your brain will understand that you're shooting, but think about this. The character takes almost a big part of the screen. So the character being here takes a big part of the screen. And if you're shooting right forward, you won't be able to understand, am I shooting right now? It doesn't make sense, right? But mechanically you are, and it reacts to whatever you're doing. But there is a way to enhance this by, for example, adding just a little bit of an animation. Animation is also feedback, and animation can also be a big part of making a game feel good. I'll just play this again so you can see. I mean, I'll play the first one so you can see how it looks when you don't really show the player what's going on other than just the ink itself. But in this case, where you add this little animation of this little shake of the shoulder and the hand, it feels much better. Not because it looks pretty, of course, the animation is good and all that, but because it's making it more clear. For example, in a 2D game, you have, for example, a basic interaction here of like shooting a cannon to this enemy. Mechanically, it's working, right? Like you shoot the bullet here to the enemy, and the bullet is disappearing, and it's removing, it's removing health from this enemy. Now, this is only from the basic development side. It's working, but it doesn't, it takes me longer. It takes longer for my brain to understand, okay, what am I damaging the enemy? So if there's a question mark there, if I'm damaging the enemy, what happens is our brain will take more cycles with the real-time control part of GameView. So for example, the thing you can do is you can start improving first and foremost to see how, like, where the bullet is going. If you add trails, these things help you with the visibility of stuff. They help you with understanding, oh, okay, I can at least see more of the bullet on its path to the enemy. But still, am I damaging the enemy? I don't get it. Doesn't understand. Here, you can add a simple blink. This goes a long way, and it's very simple. But in terms of polish, it gives you clear feedback where my bullet is going, or where is it coming from, and also, is it hitting the enemy at all? So in that sense, it allows for a lot of, feedback and less iteration cycles in your thought process. Another quote from the book here. So polish has a huge impact on GameView. It provides the visual, or this is a complicated word, oral and tactical clues a player needs in order to create a detailed, expansive mental model of the physics of virtual objects. Polish sells interaction. And this is perfect because in my path of, for example, in Mix and Jam of recreating so much mechanics, I've noticed that a lot of what makes the project successful is how you sell the interaction, because programming the basic of it is one thing, but how do you present it is different. And the presentation is not, it's not necessarily, doesn't need to look pretty, but to be understandable. And this is where the magic aspect of GameView comes, because it's really just our brain being satisfied by quickly understanding what's going on and having a clear vision. Oh, I get this. This is what's going on. And so I just told you about these three elements. So these three elements are the ingredients. Real-time control, simulated space, and polish are the ingredients for perfect GameView. And of course, this is based on the definition of the book. And the book also says that GameView is real-time control of virtual objects in a simulated space with interactions emphasized by polish. So there you go. If I, as a player, am able to feel that I really have control of this character in an environment that really makes sense for this movement to exist, and I can clearly understand everything that's going on by having constant feedback, that is a great definition of GameView. And that is GameView. And the other cool thing about GameView that I think I should mention is that in the classic iteration cycle, one thing that the designers and programmers can benefit from all the outputs that we have is using the theory of max output. So the player has one simple input, just a little thing, a little jump, a little punch. But if we as developers can return the output, and designers can return the output into a maximum level of things. So Either that's a video, that's a particle that hits, that's a sound, that's another thing, like that's a rumble in your controller. Then you have this sensation that is satisfying as well, because you're doing minimum effort to get maximum output. And it's kind of like rewards, if you think about it. Like sometimes you can add visual rewards of this input that you design in your game to be a punch. You want it to make it feel great. If your game's about combat, then your punch should feel great. So you should take this thing that you know that your game was made for and put that output, that reward to the player in form of visual, in forms of sounds, in forms of gameplay, or even the system itself. And this is why humans love these kind of things, these oddly satisfying things. But if you think about it, it's minimum input and maximum output. So you're getting the ground here immediately clean and super fast with this very simple input. If you think about it, this very simple effort. And so lots of Reddit things dedicated to oddly satisfying stuff that usually are composed of things that are minimum effort, and they have like this very clear feedback of what's going on. You can see here, it's removing the dirt. It's really fast and really simple and really works. But yeah, I think it would be a good idea now for us to go to Unity and see what can we do in that space. I guess the only thing I want to say before that is there are two videos. Of course, there's much more resources about GameFeel that you should watch. They're great. You have the Game Maker's Toolkit video on GameFeel, which is really good. And there's also Vlambeer's talk about the art of screen shake. Vlambeer's is a great developer. So yeah, definitely a resource to check out. So I will go to Unity, and please, if anyone has questions, just let me know. Like, because I don't have like a Zoom screen here very clear. So I'm just gonna keep going, but please let me know if there's any questions or whatnot. All right, so let's say you're making a little volleyball game. And of course, this is just a prototype. So I have my character here, and I just prototype it to understand the main mechanic. So I can go to the place where the ball is going to drop. I actually should maximize this. And I'm trying to hit it. So the main mechanic is there, right? I mean, it works. At least this test, right, where it's choosing random positions for the ball to fall in. But there's so much that could be made better for understanding really what's going on, but also just from a feedback standpoint to really sell the interaction. Like, are you convinced that I'm hitting the ball? I mean, I guess you could try to, in a stretch say like, yeah, I guess it makes sense you're hitting the ball. But you could improve this much more in many different ways, right? So I made like in every object here in the thing, I made a little Boolean called feel. Just going to activate the feel Boolean here. I'm going to put maximize on it. So first of all, let's get started with the ball. So what can get improved in the feel of the ball? So as you can see here, one thing is making it clear that it was hit by just adding a blink of its material. And then it makes really clear that it's being hit. And not only that, since the action of hitting the ball in a volleyball game is like one of the main actions you have, you might as well make it feel really good. And so you want your punch or your hit in the ball to feel powerful. You can also, so one thing I'm also doing here is I'm also making the size of the ball shake. You can see is punching its scale, like it's just squishy. And the other thing, of course, is I'm adding here feedback of where the ball is going to fall, because it just allows the player to have a better understanding, because really it doesn't like, since we're not having the same advantage as a real human player playing volleyball where you see it from your own perspective, we're making the gameplay easier to understand with the feedback of, okay, this is where it's going to fall. Now, the other thing that really helps to, sell, okay, this is going to help me understand the trajectory of the ball and what's going on. It's also adding trails. Trails is a good way to just solve a problem of understanding where the ball is going to go and also where it's coming from, right? And if you think about it, in a volleyball game, it's really important for people to know these kind of informations because it really helps with the strategy of the game itself. Now, here's one thing that will improve the game also in the terms of benefiting the experience that we want to deliver. In a volleyball game, the main focus really is the volleyball, right? You need to focus on the volleyball. So instead of using this default camera that is just fixated, a quick thing that we can do, and this is in Unity specifically, of course, there's implementation that you can do, is that you can make the camera sort of try to frame everything in the scene, but give a little bit of priority to the ball itself. So you'll see this in action and what I mean. So you can see that the camera now is focusing and framing everything, but it is sort of like focusing on the ball. And what this does from a gameplay perspective is that it makes it clear for the player and for your brain and for the feedback that, you know, you are really focusing on the thing that should be focused, which is the volleyball. So now we're like improving the game feel here. You know, it's really interesting, but I'm still not convinced about the player, you know, like the player doesn't look like it's hitting, like it's trying to do anything. I know it's just a capsule and it's supposed to be a placeholder, but in terms of prototyping, so when you're going to want to QA your game and test your game to see if people like it and if it feels fun, you need to really sell the interactions. Like you need to make it feel like the player's trying to hit the ball. And so I have, of course, my really cool Boolean here, which I activate. It's a feel Boolean for the player, the volley script, this part little script that I made. Whoops, sorry. So you can see now the hands at least are going up. So you can see that the hands are doing this thing. And it's really simple, but it all helps so much to our brain and our own perception of, oh, okay, we're hitting the ball, or the player is trying to hit the ball. The other thing that currently in this prototype is not very clear is when the player is moving and when the player is not moving, which is very important and also in a game like volleyball. So every implementation that I'm showing here for game feel is based on exactly the type of game we're building. I don't think there's any universal rules about game feel, but mostly is game feel should be something that is enhancing the experience of what that you're trying to deliver, the thing that you're currently trying to do. So one thing I added here to make it really clear that the player is moving, other than just the position in the screen, is a little bit of rotation, like a little bit of a tilt. Is almost comical, like this game is not taking itself too seriously, but it really makes you understand that the player is running. And when you stop, of course, you stop doing this. And to make it even better, I can make a little particle system that only activates when you're walking and running. And so in terms of what's going on in the screen, having something that emits and also having the body of the player rotate, it's already a great visual indication. Oh, you're idle. That, yeah, you're definitely moving now. You're definitely idle. So as you can see now, experience is getting much better. So you can already tell that this looks a lot polished, a lot more polished than it could, right? But this is not just trying to make it prettier. This is also just, in fact, trying to make it more clear. This is what's going on. This is where you need to go. This is what happens. And this is the kind of thing that really makes a difference, right? And this is what I was telling everyone here, like about the fact that I've been recreating mechanics for so long that you can have a simple base mechanic, but you need to sell it. So polish doesn't necessarily mean like a good 3D model or a good texture. Sometimes it means the thing, you know, the little interactions that happen and how do you perceive them. And so in this case, we have a really cool little, very simple prototype of a little volleyball game with all these things sort of experimented with. But anyways, let me see how long. That was actually pretty good, not too bad, because I don't want to put too much time going through this without having this conversation with everyone. But I thought it'd be interesting to just stop sharing so that we can have a conversation. But yeah, any questions and anything that shows up, please let me know. But that's kind of like the presentation. But we could always just go back if there's any questions related to that. And again, thank you everyone for watching. And yeah, thanks for the opportunity of hosting this. It's really cool talking about this topic.
Thank you so much for showing that to us, Andre. That was a very cool presentation. It definitely shows like the effect in your Unity demo. You could see the clear difference between when you applied that game feel aspect of it and when you didn't. So it's definitely a very important part of it. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask in the Q&A, or you can raise your hand and unmute. Okay, so someone asked, do you think games will eventually go weblized as a trend? What do you mean by that, Luke? Or
The
Andre,
question
if
is
you
for you.
understood.
No, I didn't understood actually. So what do you mean by that? Like I return your question with another question. What do you mean by weblized? But if you mean like you mean like mm, to the web as like browser games, I don't think I get it, but we'll give you a chance to web as a platform likewise. Oh, okay. Do you think games will eventually go weblized as a trend? Um, I think that there will be a very clear separation between the different platforms of games. I think that already happens today, right? I think web games, if you think about like HTML5 and stuff, so games that happen in Telegram or a little website, they already happen, right? That's already a thing. I don't think it's a trend where it is going to affect games of the AAA industry or the console game industry or PC game industry, because it's always going to be separated between the investment of the target audience. So is a target audience someone that wants to get really dedicated with games, about games? So that's always going to be outside of like web. I think is always going to be focused on consoles and platforms, and web is going to be something that usually tends to be a little bit more simplified, which I think is always going to exist like a line separating both. But thank you for the question. And anonymous attendee, thank you for watching.
So I had a question for you, Andre.
Yeah.
Since you work at Unity, since you've developed or like re-implemented all these mechanics from different games, you must have a feel for this. So what do you see as the next big thing in game development, like the game industry? Because most of these attendees will be who are interested in going into the game dev industry will be that'll be their future. So what do you see as a significant part of that?
Of the future, I think for example, like what game engines are trying to do is just trying to turn game development more accessible, right? So I think the future, and I hope that this is the future, is that we bring new ideas to the table. I think the game industry is full of great ideas, but sometimes is filled with a lot of similar ideas. And I think the thing that will set people apart in the future for game development is people that come up with fresh ideas and from different backgrounds, because it used to be that you could only develop games if you're like from a technical background, and you're from you know how to program and all that. But now it's becoming more and more democratic to make games, right? And so yeah, I think that that's like the future, is like just allowing more people to make games. And I had a teacher that always used to tell me that we as game developers, we should often read and participate and do stuff that is different than anyone else. Like every game developer goes to game design events, but how much of game developers are going to artistic events or performances or concerts and that kind of thing? So I think that's like the next thing. Like breaking a little bit of the cycle that sometimes turns the industry a little bit generic. But of course, there's still a lot of cool stuff. But I think it would be great to just see more of that indie mentality and indie philosophy in actual AAA productions. So I think that's like a good call. And this is like wishful thinking, really, I think. Um, but yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. So, someone asked the question, how can we figure out what to add to our games that will make it feel better to play? Is it based on intuition and experience, or is there a theory we should learn?
Okay, that's a terrific question. Thank you for asking that. Yeah. So, like I said before, there's no magic formula, right? But the thing is, game feel is really about enhancing what you design to be the experience, right? So if your experience is of you want to sell an experience of tranquility and it's a very chill game, you start making this design decisions of feel based on that. So what makes a good puzzle game, have a better feel? And that's something you have to iterate. There are common things. There is a common theory of things that you can do to make things clear. So there is a lot of common interactions, but a lot of it is you trying to figure out by iteration, how would it make it feel better? That said, there is a lot of things that are common, right? So a lot of it is based on feedback, right? And so what is the kind of feedback that you want to give? And so for action games, of course, screen shake is super common. Screen shake, common, right? Uh, Now, for example, for puzzle games, now another very common technique, right, is making things give a clear feedback of what's currently going on. So if you're hovering your mouse, then maybe the object has an outline, and that already enhances the game feel because it's already giving feedback. So really, I think polish is a big part of game feel, and I think polish means feedback, not necessarily like making it pretty. I think it's feedback. I think it's okay, this is really clear. For example, you play puzzle games sometimes and people go like, oh, this sound of the piece coming together is really snappy, is really good, it feels so good to listen. It's not because the sound is amazing. Of course the sound can be amazing, but it's because it gives you a clear indication that you are playing the game the way it was designed, the way it was intended, and you're fitting the little piece into the thing, and it does like a little click, a little sound, that it feels good because it's giving you direct feedback that what you just did is the right thing, or what you just did is the main action of the game. So yeah, I think that's something that we all need to figure out. And this is mainly why I brought this presentation up, because I think game feel is something that should be more theorized, should be more talked about, because then we can maybe build more theories of, okay, common use cases where game feel is applied. Here is some list of things that are done usually. But of course, you can always come up with new ways of enhancing game feel, right? That being said, the book that I mentioned for this entire talk is really good. And they talk a lot about like the theory behind it, right? The theory of what kind of things would work in specific scenarios. So that's a really good question. Thank you, Soimia. Sorry, I said your name wrong. If I said your name wrong, um, I can see another one here. Sorry if you already addressed this question as I joined late, but what are your thoughts for the future of gaming with augmented reality based gaming environments? So I've been seeing a lot more future with AR, honestly, with things that are not games, which is interesting, right? I think it started with games and now automotive architecture, a lot of people are using it. So I don't see it as impactful, but maybe I'm super wrong. Maybe it is the future of a lot of stuff, but I'm only thinking short term, because definitely if you think about maybe like mixed reality, where you mix VR and AR, then there's a lot of potential there, because I think VR is growing. But really, like I think in short term, I don't see it going, because it's been much more effective for these other areas. And because gaming is so established, right? It's going to take a long time for people to start doing these things, and also coming up with unique designs. game designs and game development for these platforms. It takes time to build. Yeah, it takes time to build fundaments, right? Like when you see VR games nowadays, VR is just an example, but you can see that a lot of games are just trying to be games that already exist, but in VR. And there needs to be a switch in mentality and philosophy where we start seeing the platform as its own unique thing, opportunity to create mechanics that are designed for the thing. And so we need to start designing for AR as well. And this needs to become more common. And it's going to take a while because it always takes a while, figuring out what's the best thing for AR. People need to do it. People need to fail. People need to release games. Games needs to be, a lot of games need to like make success so that like the future generations then sort of learn from what went well and what went wrong to sort of fix it. But I do hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that answer. Um, if anyone else has any questions, we still have a little time. Feel free to ask. So, Andre, I have a question some people might be wondering. Um, if you're interested in going into the game dev field, but don't really have experience, don't really know where to start, are feeling kind of lost in all these technologies, all these different terms, where would you recommend they start?
I think the most important thing for someone to enter the game industry is to lose a little bit of that fear of that, like sort of trying to make this barrier and noticing that it's not so crazy, right? I didn't study like programming while in my graduation. So I was graduated design. And so this barrier was super huge for me all the time. I was just like, oh no, this is super hard. This is impossible. I think what you need to do is you need to empathize and try to see it as it is. It's not that this is the most simple thing in the world, but as soon as you start being part of and seeing things up close, you can definitely tell that it's not as hard as you might seem. As you might think. So first and foremost, participate of game jams, right? I think participating in game jams is one of the best things that you can do as someone that's trying to get into the game development industry, because game jams are these 3-day marathon, 2-day marathons where you're making games. So the stakes are very low, right? No one's expecting you to make an amazing game. So you just go ahead and do it. And you get the experience of working with people. You get the experience of figuring stuff out with the resources and that is actually the industry. No one, like, I mean, what I mean by this is not everyone knows everything. People make experiences and make games with what they know, with what they have and the resources they have. And so that's the idea, is no one is expecting you to know everything. You should just use whatever you know now and try to make this little game. And in a game jam is really cool because you work with people, then you have a result at the end. And sometimes you don't have a result, and that's fine. You had the experience of, oh, now I know what it is. And maybe now I know what I want to focus. I thought the animation and like process, doing little animations was really cool, but maybe I want to become an animator because that was a cool experience. And so, yeah, losing that fear is really important. I know it's easier said than done, but for me, it was like groundbreaking. Like when I lost that fear, I was like, oh my God, wait, actually, I don't need to be like a crazy programmer. Like I can try to like use an engine that the goal of the engine is trying to make it easier for me. I can use that to really like try to learn, and with the channel. So with Mix and Jam, that's something I try to do. And hopefully it works, that I try to demystify game development. I try to show people, look, it's by dissecting, you can see that things are not that crazy. And actually, a lot about games is game fuel. And this thing that I was talking about, like if you think about the most successful games out there, they have great game fuel. They're very polished. And so it's really hard to get into the technical part, right? The coding, the animating, the modeling. But sometimes the way the interactions of this experience you've built is sold or is presented matters for your game to be like, to make a difference. So you do, like, for example, there are so many little games that have great game feel that are very successful that if you think about the technicality of it, you're like, this game is simple, but it's so well executed, right? It feels so good to play. It's so well designed that, you know, that's a good game. If you go to HIO, you'll see a bunch of little games, but they're super polished. And I think this is a topic that should make people excited about it, because when understanding game theory, you can go like, oh wait, actually I can make like simple systems, but I can dedicate a lot of time just making that experience like really tactile, really cool, really amazing. And then you will notice that your players, right, which is the people that actually matter, and in the end of the cycle, the people that play, they're gonna find it fun if it has good sounds, if it has good real-time control, real good feedback, a real simulated space, that kind of stuff. But thank you for that question. I can already see another
Thank you
one
so
here.
much.
Do
So
we
we
have
have
time?
we have one more question, but we have
Yep.
about 6 minutes to answer it. So um
Hopefully
n-
I can. Hopefully I can get it.
no worries. Knowing what you know today, is there a programming language or software library or engine you would have benefited more by learning earlier or not even bothering to learn? So if you could
Hmm.
go back in time and sort of change what you did, what would you have learned? What would you not have learned?
Yeah, that's a great question, and also a very abstract and complicated one. But I think that I wish I would know, or not even know, but stimulate logic thinking before, like even before I like was starting graduation, like in school or just as a teenager, whatever. So, for example, right now I'm playing Game Builder Garage on the Nintendo Switch, which is a little game where you make games with like a visual scripting language. So it's literally just getting these blocks of behavior and connecting. Just connecting is like super easy. So in terms of understanding the back end of what development means, understanding logic is the first step. So for me, a big part of the barrier was that I didn't even understood that there was a logic, like how things work. Like, wait, how do you know when things stops? What are conditions? What are comparisons? And that kind of things. Like, if this is equals this, you can do this. And I think that there's no particular technology that would make it easier. I think it's literally the theory. Like, if I was introduced or if I went after the knowledge of what is logic and how does it work with games, I would have lost less time afraid. And also, of course, because I was learning how to code in C sharp, it means you lose a little bit of time understanding the, I don't even know how to say that word, just the way the programming language works, right? The structure, the classes, the functions. You're like, so that is a barrier. So if you're trying to get excited as fast as you can and sort of not give up, that sort of thing can be a barrier. So you should totally like try visual scripting tools, or engines like Game Maker, where like completely simplified for your understanding, because you can also build a smaller ladder where instead of just like, okay, first step is learning code and C sharp. No, you can first start by logic, then by connecting nodes and doing stuff. And you can do this in a more subtle way. Because in my case, I was presented with everything at the same time. I was lucky enough that I was like energetic and I was like, yeah, and you know what? It's going to embrace everything and learn. But if there's something I would change, is when I was almost ready to like professional life, I would like formal education, I would like slowly build the logic and dissecting video games. And okay, this is what I can do. Okay, these are the engines that exist. This is what I prefer to use. Because for me, it was everything at the same time. But actually, yeah, I'll just tell you this. if you have a Nintendo Switch, Game Builder Garage is actually a pretty amazing tool for you to like click, for the logic to click. It's so cool, so well done, specifically because I think it's made for kids to know how to program, so to learn how to program. So I mean, I'm a like professional developer and I have a lot of fun with it. So I think it's a great tool. And maybe I would love, yeah. Could you imagine if I was a kid and Nintendo Switch existed back then and I could play Game Builder Garage? That'd be so dope. That'd be amazing. So if I could change that, why not?
Thank you so much for that answer. Um, yeah, so someone in the chat said thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here with us, Andre, and spending your time with us. On behalf of everyone at Labs, we really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
No worries. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity, and it's also always a great topic to talk about. And for this future generation, right? It's not that I'm like old or whatever. I'm also part of the generation, but like,
Yeah,
yeah, let's talk more about game development. But I mean game development as well. But like, let's talk more about game feel. Let's
yeah,
talk more about like interactions. Let's talk more about like what does it mean to build the systems, but what does it mean to focus on the experience, which is the thing that
definitely.
your user will take the most. But
Yeah,
yeah, thank you very much. And if you want
thank
to
you.
see anything that I do, anything and follow and even talk to me if you want, you can follow me on my Twitter, which is I'll just put it in. There's no chat, so
I can put it in the event description.
there you go. So
Yeah,
they'll put it in the event description, and if you will kindly also put the link for the YouTube channel
of
if you want to
course,
check Mix and
of
Jam.
course.
It's more from a yeah sentimental standpoint. I think is good to watch, not because I make it, but really because watching content that things are being deconstructed is good
Yeah.
for empathizing and for like feeling okay about stuff. So
Hmm.
dismystifying, right? So I mean, there's other channels making stuff look good. You have old brackies. You have so many channels that you could watch and
Yeah.
see these. But but yeah, thanks to everyone and
Thank you. It
thanks
was an
to
honor
you.
having you here.
Yeah,
Thank you. Have a
awesome.
great day, everyone. Thank you again.